Hey, I'm Patrick O'Donnell from the Norman Rockwell Museum, and today we are here at the studio of Tony DiTerlizzi, and we are going to work on some D&D character warm-ups. And so we are going through a classic tome here.
Yes,
Monstrous manual from my personal collection. It's very precious to me. And we are going to draw one of my favorite characters that I fought against several times, a bugbear, and this is one of Tony's original drawings, and he's going to take us through how to draw. We're going to do a bust, kind of a warm-up, get ourselves
in
going.
shape, right? Yeah, kind of get our brain and eyes working. Well, one of the things when you showed me this, Pat, that I remembered was that when I was fresh out of art school working on this book, I didn't have a lot of money, so I used a lot of Dover books, and this is the actual Dover book that I used as reference on the Monster Manual, Historic Costume and Pictures. And here on, I don't know what page it is, but it looks like it's plate 6, Ancient Germans and Vikings from the Bronze Age and Stone Age were the reference for the bugbear. So I thought it'd be cool if we looked at the original inspiration and source material, and we'll just do some warm-ups and draw our own version of the bugbear.
Awesome.
So we're just using laser paper today, nothing crazy, nothing fancy. This is what I normally warm up with. I've got a number 2 Ticonderoga pencil. What do you've got? You got a 2H? Yeah.
2H.
I feel like that's the good. I've been using this since I was in kindergarten.
Yeah.
Hasn't failed me yet. This is really just about you and I getting our eye-hand-brain coordination kind of going. I'm going to start with just some general shapes for the bugbear head. I'm kind of taken back to this. I was looking at a lot of comic books too at that time, and I remember like in the late 80s, early 90s, Art Adams was so huge, man. He was one of the, there was so many great comic book artists. I mean, obviously Frank Miller and Jim Lee and Todd McFarlane, but I remember Art Adams had there was almost like an animated quality to his work that I always liked. So I distinctly remember the kind of conjuring a bit of Art Adams in this guy with his kind of superhero type features.
Yeah, he's definitely got the heroic proportions, but what I really liked is how you change the shape of the head and give it that really wide triangular.
Yeah, it's definitely it's kind of a basic shape, right? And I think it was almost looking at probably gorillas and apes too, so that it's more it gives them almost more of a primal type look. Because these guys are in D&D land, these guys are pretty bad news. They're really hard. Humanoids being orcs and goblins and things of that nature. Gnolls, these guys are some of the toughest foes you'd go against. I really tried to show that in these.
Yeah, they definitely cut a few adventures quick for me when I was a wee tug, so.
Just kind of got them with the scowl, the sneer. I'm just doing really basic kind of...
Quick loose shapes.
Yeah, just getting my hand and everything ready so we can do our painting demo, which we'll be doing after this.
Got those deep set eyes.
And I'm also looking at, look at this guy, man. He's awesome.
I know.
I have relatives that kind of look like that.
What I love about this is these are some of the most threatening human beings you could ever see, but they're all casually standing there and chatting.
Yeah, exactly. With a giant club with spikes coming out of it.
Yeah.
Did you see the news today? So I'm just kind of looking at this. If a lot of my fans can probably tell you that one of my favorite things to do is to kind of go back and redraw things that I drew 20 years ago to kind of measure how I've changed and grown in those years. And so sometimes I look at these old drawings and in some ways I'm impressed and embarrassed at the same time of what I was able to do at such a young age.
Do you find that you see a lot of, when you're looking at progress in that fashion, do you see a million things that you didn't see before? Do you feel like, wow, I had a better handle on it than I knew at the time?
I think that's a good way of saying it, actually. I think it's like I didn't even know what I didn't know. Right. So at the time I'm like, this was the best I could do, the best of my abilities. And then, years later you have a better understanding of anatomy or a better understanding of how to draw, drapery, or, your observational skills have improved, which I really think is something that just happens with time and experience, that you start to see things as an artist and see things differently than perhaps you did when you were younger. And so, for instance, I had a bunch of dental work done about 8 years ago, and you can actually see in my artwork that how I draw teeth completely changed. Like I was so much more, having to get the little cast made of your teeth and everything, and I kind of studied it, and all my characters started getting crooked teeth and spaces in their teeth after that.
So yeah, it's so fascinating. Oftentimes the students will say, "Does everybody know what a fire hydrant looks like?" And everyone, of course, says, "Yes, yes."
And then you're like, "Now draw it."
Yeah, now draw it. And,
Yeah.
the things you get, it's just 90% of illustration is observation. So it's
Absolutely.
fascinating.
And also it is that observation, and for me now at a point where back then I would have used a lot of reference. I would have needed the reference, like security blankets, and I still use a lot of reference to this day. But after drawing for 40 years, there's some now that I've got some accrued knowledge where I can draw stuff out of my head, and in fact, that some of the artists that I love the most, the initial drawings do come out of their imagination first, and then you get the reference you need to better understand your subject. So for instance, I don't know how to draw, Bronze Age armor, so obviously I'd use reference, but the general feeling that I want the character to have, I would do out of my imagination now.
So is there something like a particular type of subject that always stymies you, or you always feel you need reference no matter how many times you draw it?
I've never been 100% comfortable with my perspective, especially I'm working on this picture book now, this Christmas picture book, and there's a lot of indoor scenes that I have to do, and I've got to get the perspective right. And I actually was talking to another picture book illustrator, a couple of them actually, Bill Joyce and David Wiesner, and David actually suggested what Jim Gurney had told me long ago, which is he's like, you need to just build a little replica model of space, and then you're going to be able to have that as your reference moving forward. You'll be able to look through the windows and move it around, and that, I'm hoping that's really going to be able to help me understand that spatial perspective.
Yeah. Have you ever expanded into any of the like easier buy-in digital programs like Google SketchUp or anything like that to build your models out?
I haven't. I know a lot of people do, and one of my best friends, Scott Fisher, who's a fantastic illustrator, uses like SketchUp and things like that for that exact reason. He can knock out some amazing perspectives, both with a long vanishing point or a short perspective, using some of those apps. I guess it's a matter of like, I really want to learn how to do it old school. I really want to learn how to kind of do it with pencils and rulers and stuff, and then when I use a computer, I have a kind of a better understanding through real life, I guess. Does that make any sense?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, with the strings and the going out to the vanishing point 7 feet off the paper kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely something that. So I want to understand it that way, and then I feel like every time I've gone in to do things digitally, that understanding has helped me use the digital tools better.
And now for digital, is there a lot of digital in when you're creating, or do you just try and keep it as traditional media as possible, or do you not have a preference, and so long as it gets you to where you want to be?
Yeah, I think the latter. I mean, I use Photoshop primarily, and I use it as a tool. If you look, I've got a mirror right here by the table, so I can make faces in there, and I can also check the artwork. The table we're drawing on is a light table, so we can do a flip check, which I do often. So for anyone tuning in, so what we would do is I would turn on the light table here, and then all you do is you simply flip the artwork over it. And when you do a mirror flip, a lot of times there's errors that can be found in the drawing. Yours is a little lighter hand. I usually tend to scrabble it a little hard, but even like looking here, like I can see the structure of the skull is a little lopsided here.
Yep.
So I can make adjustments on it like this that would kind of fix it. You see that, how I'm fixing it? And then I can go back and I can look for those lines to help me understand and fix it. So I do a lot of that kind of stuff that's more traditional, but you can do all that in Photoshop as well. I could scan this in, I can drop it into Photoshop, I can mirror flip it with obviously a click of a button, and I can draw right on top of it, obviously in the computer as well. So again, I think it's kind of taking looking at it, analog.
Right.
And then when I get in there, I know exactly what to do. But I'll do the same for like my color studies before I do a painting. I'll do a traditional watercolor color study, but 9 times out of 10, it ends up in Photoshop, and it ends up being worked and reworked, and the values are moved and adjusted in Photoshop before I go to the final. So I'm often working off a printout that has been adjusted in Photoshop. And even if once the painting's done, I'll run it through Photoshop for some cleanup before I send it off to the the art director. Which actually, that's the biggest thing. I mean, the art doesn't leave the studio anymore. We were kind of talking about that earlier.
Yeah, and so you just a big 11 by 17 scanner?
Yep. Yeah. And they've automated all the stitching it all together in Photoshop now, so it's much easier to sketch something in pieces and then have Photoshop put it together for you.
Sure. So now, what would be the average size of a working image for you?
I usually, my general rule of thumb in the past has been 2 times the size of the printed version. Mm-hmm. So I'll, if this thing was gonna, if this guy I knew was gonna reproduce that, let's say here, he probably looks like he's about 3 inches. I would do him a minimum of 6 inches tall, okay. So knowing that he'll tighten up nicely. But lately, I've also been toying with the idea of working a little closer to 100%, maybe like at 120%, just to kind of help. It helps my brain kind of understand like how much the art is going to reduce, and gives me a bit of a closer idea of how it's going to look in the final printed version. If that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. So the translation, do you feel anything's lost once it goes into the digital? Any life or energy, or you just...
No, I don't. I mean, I don't think so. I mean, I think the thing I always find frustrating is when we look at anything digitally, whether it's on a screen or on our computers or on a phone or on an iPad or whatever, those items they have that backlight coming through. It's illuminated, so the color is always going to be brighter. The color is going to always feel more rich and vivid, and especially now that the screens are getting more and more fine with their the retina display and stuff like that, and so consequently I've tried to scan my stuff in at a much higher resolution than I used to. So most stuff is reproduced at 300 dpi. And now I scan it at 600 dpi, and I think it's because I'm trying to chase that beautiful quality of what we see on a computer screen that you don't necessarily see traditionally.
Right, and given the digital age and the way media is consumed, I mean, odds are your image will be viewed digitally as likely as not, right?
Yeah, I think. Well, I mean, primarily I do kids' books, so I think. I don't know how many grade school kids are reading my books on an iPad or a Nook or whatever, but that's not to say it's not going to happen, or it isn't happening. But I'm a bit old-fashioned that way, where I'm definitely thinking of holding a book in your hand or in your lap, or with your mom or your dad reading to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, so you put a lot of tonality in pretty fast, huh?
Yeah, I use the pencil a lot like a brush, so I always keep it on. I generally sketch with it on its side like this, so very parallel to the paper, so I can get a broad, soft stroke. And once I find my construction lines, like here, this one I didn't quite like how it was coming, so I just did a do-over. These are easier to erase because I'm just rubbing a soft line over the top of the paper. When I flip the pencil perpendicular to the paper and start doing a fine line, it's also putting a groove in the paper as well. Maybe minute, but this line is going to be a lot easier. It's barely any effort to erase. This one, see, I'm getting a ghost image.
Yeah.
So I got to mar the paper. I got to take a little bit of fiber off in order to get that reduced. So usually when I'm doing this kind of stuff, I try to do it the soft side of the pencil before I flip it. And then once I feel like I'm close to where I want to be, I flip it up into the point and start drilling down,
Nice.
defining those final shapes and stuff.
So when you flip, do you ever find yourself just using the other side of the drawing more when you flip to correct?
Oh, when I flip it to correct? It hasn't happened too often, but it just helps me see it fresh. The other obviously one is to just literally, and I do this a lot with painting. I don't know if we'll see the big of a result, but you just flip it upside down sometimes, and looking at it upside down helps you start to look at the image more in abstract shapes as opposed to representational shapes. This is more effective when you're on a painting and you've been painting the same thing for like a week and you've been staring at it and you're not totally desensitized. You're like, I don't know if it's good anymore.
Yeah.
Flipping it upside down or holding it up in a mirror will help you determine how it's looking.
Have you ever just abandoned wholesale paintings even at a late stage and you're just like, it's
Yeah.
just flattened out, I can't.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, as I've gotten older, I don't feel that sense of like everything I create is going to be perfect this go round, even if I've done a lot of homework in preparation for it. When I was working on Arthur Spiderwick's field guide, those big Audubon style paintings, they took days and days just to get the underdrawing done, where I gathering all the reference for every bit of fur and hair and everything and wings. And I remember there was this image of a troll, and he's submerged in the water in the image. And I spent days painting this troll, and I was going to do like a line. The troll would be in the water, and there'd be a water line, and you'd be able to see all the lily pads and stuff below the water with the troll. So I draw this troll, and it's basically this. So the troll's here. He's floating in the water. He's got these long arms. Right, and then there's like a water line like this, and there's lily pads and everything like this. Right, this is the plate. So I spend days painting this troll. Oh, to get every little wart and algae, had algae coming off his arms, and there's a dragonfly on his head. And the last thing I was going to do, I had this perfectly in my mind. I'm like, I'm going to do this beautiful wash of like a green. I'm going to flip the painting upside down. I'm going to do this wash of green like a pond, and it's going to all run to the bottom like this and get more intense, right? So I get the whole troll painted. I mix the paint. I go to put the green on. It looks like melted chocolate mint chip ice cream. It looks horrible. It looked like I just like poured melted milk on this thing, right? And I'm like, I can't lift it up. Like I know I'm not going to be able to get it off. So I had to totally start all over from scratch. And I literally, it was about this time of year, and I remember it was like freezing rain, and Angela came in to check on me. How you doing? Because she knew I was under such an insane deadline. I'm like, I have to go for a walk. And it was literally like a music video where I'm just crying in the rain, and no one will understand. I've got to draw this troll again. So it happens, Now I'm more of the mind of like, draw several and pick the better one, especially with the pen and ink stuff, because you can have a line off just by a few millimeters, and that can really affect the finished thing, especially if it's on a face. Man, one eye, the pupil of an eye can be off by a millimeter, and the whole thing can look, wonky. And so a couple years ago, I illustrated a book that Mo Willems wrote called Diva and Flea. It's about a dog and a cat who become buddies. And for those, I would do like 4 or 5 ink drawings for every one that went into the book, just because I was having such a good time, and I just wanted them. I just figured I'll pick the best of the session, and then go from there.
And do you ever you see some examples, Norman Rockwell's, preliminary charcoal drawings where he's pasted things in. And
Yeah,
done a lot. Have you done a lot of that type of?
I've definitely done. I usually do it. I can do it virtual. Sometimes I'll do it again analog. So like this guy. So say on this guy, I'm like, man, I really want to see what the rest of this guy looks like. I'll literally just grab a piece of paper and just tape it down and let's just keep going. Or sometimes what I'll do is I'll just grab a piece of paper, draw his body, but I won't draw his head. I would just literally just draw his body, and then I'd scan this in and just digitally stitch the two together.
Yeah, those are the coolest images where you see pieces of trace taped on with all different sketches and the whole process captured into one page. It's just wild.
Well, it's reassuring to hear that someone like Rockwell also did that. I mean, I think what's interesting is we're so used to going to a museum or looking in a book, and we see only the finished painting, the finished image that someone's created, and not realize that there was so much process to get from point A to point B that, the Four Freedoms started out as, you know, little thumbnail drawings that were not referenced, that he's drawing out of his head, trying to figure out what they are, and then he's going and finding, you know, reference and getting the models to pose, et cetera, you know, doing color studies. I mean, there's so much stuff that happens kind of behind the scenes. It's like watching your favorite science fiction or fantasy movie, and then there's, you know, 3 hours of how we made it.
Yeah. There's, you know, Rockwell would take 75 to 100 photos per painting.
Are you serious?
Yeah, and he would take them, and you know the photos that he would use because they'd have a thumbtack hole in them.
Oh, no
where
kidding.
He would pin it right to the paper or to the canvas as reference, and he would draw, and he effectively was doing what you described in Photoshop with collaging or fixing, you know. So oftentimes, you know, I take reference and I put it together in Photoshop.
Yeah.
Just turn it black and white, collage it as I like.
Okay.
And then, you know, either print it up or just pull it up on the screen and use it as reference. But, I think it's interesting. I think Rockwell would have been all over Photoshop had it been around when he was working.
I would think, yeah, I would think so. I don't even know. I mean, did he use tracing paper method too, or not?
Yeah, he would have pieces, tracing paper. He would have giant rolls of, it looks like newsprint, but you'd see seams put together, and then, you know, there's examples where he did work for the Franklin Mint where everything is perfect, and then there's a square pasted in
right
for
in
the
middle.
gentleman's head where he decided
Didn't like
that,
that.
yeah, whatever he was doing, he didn't care for it, so he changed it.
I've seen Charles Dana Gibson's originals, and it's the same kind of situation where there'll be an amazing, you know, as a person who loves to draw in pen and ink, there'll be this beautiful pen and ink drawing of an entire crowd scene, and then the main girl and the Gibson girl right in the middle is just a giant patch of board, you know, glued right in the middle of the thing. And it doesn't matter. You know the stuff's going to reproduce. It's going to. The viewer will never know.
Yeah, and that's another thing. They were all keenly aware of the reproduction process and how their work would translate, as you just said.
Yeah.
So do you exploit anything of that? Like, are there certain trappings or nuances of the reproduction process when something goes to a book or it goes, you know, to a card that you don't have to worry about, and you don't have to think about as, you know, consider as heavily because it probably won't even.
No, I'm pretty involved with the whole process. Probably to the enjoyment and woe of any art director who's worked with me. I tend to, you know, really be into right down to the minutia, because really for me, the end result is the book. It's not really the illustration. The illustration is a part of a whole, but it's not the whole for me. So the final book, the experience that you get when you're reading the words and looking at the pictures, that's really the end final result. And so I'm very attentive right up until that thing goes to press. And even then, even after the darn book's gone to press, I'm like, well, you know, we could fix this, or we could change that. I ask and tweak right up until they tell me to stop tweaking. So I'm a perfectionist that way.
It's interesting to hear you say you see the book or rather the physically reproduced item as the end all.
Yeah.
As opposed to the illustration itself.
Yeah.
It would seem like it'd be the opposite. Like, I have the illustrations, how it would, you know, how other hands handle it is their, you know, kind of purview.
Yeah.
But, you know.
No, I think it's looking at it. It's what is the illustration's function. I suppose if I was doing just a book cover or a magazine cover, as Rockwell would have done, I would have been more keenly focused on just that singular image. But when it comes to you know, a picture book or even a chapter book, it's really about the sequence of images. They have to all kind of work together. It's almost like taking it's like taking Bohemian Rhapsody and just isolating one guitar track. It's not Bohemian Rhapsody. You need all those pieces to kind of work together to form this great, you know, experience.
100%.
I think I'm ready to do some. I don't know about you, man, but I think I'm ready to do some paint. My bugbear's like, let's paint.
I'm kind of starting to go down the bugbear hole here. I don't know what's going on.
Oh, it's looking good.
Well, in fairness, I've been staring at that picture for 20 years trying to figure out how you did it. So, you know.
And now you know. That's good.
So,
all right, there it is.
there we go.
Here's my guy. He's a little more... He dyes his hair now to kind of cover up that it'd be gray.
Yeah, he's angry. My guy's giving the blue steel stare.
That's good, though. I like it.
You know,
Very good.
the sultry bugbear.
Awesome. Well, it's been good drawing with you, man.
Yeah, thank you. Tony,
All
this
right.
has been great.
Awesome,
Wonderful.
man.
Appreciate it.
Let's do some painting next, and
Yeah.
we'll have a good time.
Let's get crazy.
All right.
Nice. Bye. Thank you for joining us.